to Just Asia, AHRC TV's weekly human rights program. These are the headlines. UN Special Rapporteur Professor Juan Mendez speaks to Just Asia. Muslim mob threatens to burn Christian homes in Punjab, Pakistan. Victims commemorate past human rights abuses in Indonesia. Thailand rights defender missing. Rape and murder of Dalit law student in Kerala, India, poorly investigated. Urgent appeals from Nepal, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. Welcome to AHRC TV's Just Asia. I am Julia Roblondo. This week, Just Asia begins with an exclusive interview with UN Special Rapporteur on Torture and Other Cruel, Inhumane and Degrading Treatment or Punishment Professor Juan E. Mendez. The international community must pay more attention to rehabilitating the life of torture victims, Professor Mendez said, speaking to the editor of Torture magazine, Nilantha Ilangamuwa, on Tuesday, May 17th. Prior to his appointment as Special Rapporteur in 2010, Mr. Mendez acted as Special Advisor on Crime Prevention to the Prosecutor of the International Criminal Court and as a co-chair of the International Bar Association Human Rights Institute. Until May 2009, he was the president of the International Center for Transitional Justice. Mr. Mendez shares his views on various issues during the interview, including his most recent visit to Sri Lanka. Here are some highlights of the interview, while the full interview will be available in the forthcoming issue of the Torture magazine.
The severity of torture and the lingering effects of torture can be very different for other people, especially if they are left with physical or mental wounds that are long-term. In those cases, rehabilitation with professional help is absolutely necessary. And unfortunately, the international community has not paid enough attention to rehabilitation and reparations for torture. There are very good organizations that render some services, especially to people who are in exile after having been tortured. But in the same country where one has been tortured, it's very difficult to find rehabilitation services. Not impossible. There are some countries where some experiments that are very valuable have gone on. At the same time, it is my understanding that funding for rehabilitation services is dwindling at the international level. The UN Fund for the Victims of Torture, for example, that does a lot of very good work in this regard and supports and funds many organizations around the world, does not get enough support. I would definitely suggest that people try to find in their inner selves, in their souls, the strength to overcome the lingering effects of torture. And one way of doing it is to dedicate some efforts to fighting the practice of torture around the world. But I also think that it's important for all of us to support rehabilitation services wherever they are, and especially in the front lines where people are most in need of it. Well, I think we have an important communicational challenge there. I mean, I think the arts and the culture generally does a good job of demonstrating the suffering of individuals under torture, how devastating that can be for them, but also for families and for acquaintances and for society at large. But we have not been good enough or effective enough in challenging this sense that torture works. I think we do have a lot of evidence that it doesn't, and very good arguments to show that there are better ways to solve crime, to prevent terrorism than torture. But we haven't done a good enough job to convince the public that those methods are there and that they are humane, and at the same time they are effective. And besides, they are not illegal, which is, the main reason why torture should be banned. I also think that in order to terminate torture, or at least reduce it substantially, some important institutional changes need to happen in Sri Lanka. Most of them, I would say, reflect a very passive attitude of the judiciary and of the State Council, the prosecutor's office. The Attorney General's does, in my mind, they're basically passive in the sense that they let the police conduct the investigation, and they just sit back and let the file come to them to decide whether to charge criminal offenses or not. And if they do that, they are so dependent on the police that, of course, they will not have any appetite to investigate the police torture. So it's almost a prescription for torture going completely unpunished. They didn't promise us anything. They acknowledged to us that they are considering repealing the PTA and replacing it, and they specifically mentioned that they're working in 3 pieces of legislation that would replace the PTA. But I don't think that was any, news-breaking piece of information. I think, in fact, they acknowledged what everybody seemed to have some familiarity with, that the PTA is being revamped or changed or will be changed. Was what we heard anyway, even before that briefing. The briefing, if anything, the response to our briefing was a confirmation of what I think most Sri Lankans knew anyway. What the problem is that we don't know what the text of those draft pieces of legislation that they are considering. And we know only the subject matter, but not exactly what they intend to contain. And so until we do, it's difficult to know whether it's going to be a significant improvement over the PTA or more of the same or a drastic change. But I'm hopeful nevertheless, just because of the fact that the government confirms that they're working. Let me clarify the position of the Department of Defense, the Pentagon, with regards to the invitation that I sought to visit Guantanamo has not changed. In 2012, the Department of Defense invited me to visit Guantanamo, but on conditions that I could not accept because they entailed a guided tour and a briefing and a tour of some parts of the facility, but not all. And most importantly, with a specific condition that I could not talk to any inmate there, not even in, under monitored circumstances. I just could not talk to them. Under those circumstances, of course, I declined. In a separate case, the lawyers for people who are being tried by military commissions and who are held in Guantanamo are asking the court, asking the military commission for permission to let me visit them, the prisoners in prison, in unmonitored circumstances for the purposes of providing expert testimony to the court on whether they have suffered torture or not in the past. But it's only one of the copies. Fortunately, it's not lost forever. But it's still, really curious and perhaps, a matter of concern. By accident, quote unquote, the CIA, no less, destroys a report or a copy of the report that they have strenuously fought against being revealed. But it brings to mind the obligation that the United States government has to publish that report. Because, as you know, what has been published is a summary of it only, and very heavily redacted at that. So we have been insisting on the U.S. government, as a matter of its obligations under the Convention Against Torture, which includes the right to truth about what happened, that the full report of the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence be published, and with as few redactions as possible. There may be some that are needed to protect sources and methods of intelligence, but if it is to protect the fact that human rights violations have occurred, there should be no state secrets about them.
Next, in Pakistan's Punjab province, a charged Muslim mob is threatening to set fire to the homes of the Christian community of Chak 44, Mandi Bahaudin. A minor disagreement between 2 colleagues, one Muslim and one Christian, has engulfed the entire community, resulting in restlessness and chaos. Imran, the Christian colleague, has fled for his life, as Muslim clerics have issued a fatwa against him for alleged blasphemy. Since then, the Muslim residents have given 3 options to the Christian community: convert to Islam if they want to continue living in the village, leave the village forever, or hand Imran over so they can burn him alive in front of the church. The Muslim residents have also refused to sell any goods to the Christians or buy from them, leaving the Christian community in dire straits. The police have also done little to protect the community. This is not the first time that Muslim extremists have leveled false blasphemy charges on Christians in order to cleanse their areas. In fact, Pakistan's Christians, particularly in Lahore, have always been victims of violence, rape, killing, and attacks on their churches and sacred places. Christians are persecuted on charges of blasphemy, and Christian girls are abducted and forced to convert to Islam. In Indonesia, victims of human rights abuses under Suharto regime and their families are marking 18 years of political reform, beginning with Suharto's resignation in 1998 with a public event commemorating past human rights abuses. This May 2016, the victims and their families are calling for the public to remember what happened in the past and demanding the current government to resolve those past abuses. 12 May 1998 saw 4 students shot to death at Trisakti University during an anti-Suharto demonstration, and on 13 to 15 of May 1998, security forces ignored and even allegedly supported the riots occurring in many big cities of Indonesia. The May riots also saw the gang rape of hundreds of thousands of ethnic Chinese. Although the National Commission on Human Rights has finished investigating 7 cases of past human rights abuses under the Suharto regime and has submitted its report to the Attorney General, the Attorney General is reluctant to follow up Komnas HAM's report. Rather, the AG seemingly prefers to bring all the cases to the reconciliation mechanism, which remains a controversial idea as there is no clear standard of reconciliation. To learn more, Just Asia speaks to Ruyati Darwin, family member of a victim of the 1998 May riots.
Komentar Ibu untuk kasus Mei 98, ya pertama sih saya bukan komentar, tapi mungkin ini harapan ya. Ini harapan, saya mengharapkan sekali agar bisa segera dituntaskan. Kemudian kalau komentarnya adalah peristiwa ini itu menyangkut banyak korban itu, dan sampai sekarang pun belum ada perhatiannya dari pemerintah. Namun kemarin kan Jokowi sudah berkomitmen, padahal dia akan segera menyelesaikan kasus pelanggaran HAM. Nah itu sebelum jadi presiden ya. Nah harapan saya ini mohon ya Pak Jokowi tersentuh hatinya sekarang untuk segera menyelesaikan kasus-kasus pelanggaran HAM selain khususnya kasus Mei 98. Harapan saya. Semoga aja komentar saya, semoga aja juga semuanya di jajaran pemerintahan ini akan memperhatikan kami para korban Mei 98. Karena 18 tahun sudah kami dengan ibu juga berjuang. Juga kami ada kamisan berdiri di depan istana itu pun juga hampir 9 tahun. Tapi kan masih juga nggak didengar. Sudah berkali-kali surat disampaikan ya ke Seknek, terutama ke Pak Jokowi untuk mohon perhatiannya untuk Mei 98 agar segera dituntaskan, dan kami keluarga korban tidak menuntut macam-macam, hanya menuntut keadilan dan pengungkapan kebenaran atas Mei 98.
In Thailand, land rights defender Mr. Den Kamlay is reported missing. Mr. Kamlay belongs to the Kokyo community of Konsan District, Chayapum Province, which is facing forced eviction from land they have occupied for 45 years. Since 2015, Mr. Kamlay has been leading a network of local villagers to re-establish their rights over the land. Mr. Den Kamlay entered a forest close to his home in the Kokyo community to collect food on April 16th and was never seen again. His wife, Mrs. Supap Kamlay, filed a complaint regarding her husband's disappearance the following day with the Huayang police station. The police failed to conduct an investigation, however, and made no attempt to help her with the search for her husband. With no grounds to believe that Mr. Kamlay has been killed in a natural disaster or by an animal, nor did he have any personal disputes with anyone, Frontline Defenders, a Dublin-based rights group, lists Mr. Dent's status as disappeared on its website. It remains unclear who is responsible for Dent's abduction, but the government must be held accountable for its apathy towards disappearance and killings of land rights defenders in Thailand, said spokeswoman Erin Kilbride. Next, a poor 27-year-old Dalit law student was found brutally raped and murdered in her house in Kerala, India on April 28th. The incident resulted in a media storm and widespread protests, especially against the backdrop of Kerala's recently concluded assembly elections, where contesting parties were accused of using rape and murder for political mileage. Police investigated the case badly, allowing evidence to be lost by not cordoning off the crime scene and hurriedly cremating the body. The case exposed the inefficiency and prejudice of the Kerala police and showed the poor state of criminal investigation in the country. Finally, the Urgent Appeals Weekly features 4 cases from Nepal, Sri Lanka, and the Philippines. In Nepal, 3 police officers attached to the area police office Surkhet district tortured 2 youth aged 15 and 19. The policemen then garlanded the 2 victims with shoes and slippers and paraded them in the market. In Sri Lanka, Mr. Neil Silva, a Kandy hotel owner, was illegally arrested, detained, and produced before the magistrate of Kandy on fabricated charges by police officers attached to the Peradeniya police station on 3 December 2015. In the Philippines, a father and son were tortured for allegedly stealing from a convenience store. They were interrogated and beaten up to admit to the crime. In another case, the police shot a man in front of his wife and children when they came to serve an arrest warrant to him. That is all for this episode of Just Asia. For more on these and other issues, please visit www.humanrights.asia or www.alrc.asia/justasia. Thank you for watching and see you next week.